Sarah Martinez had always been different from other students. While her classmates struggled with basic cooking techniques at the Culinary Institute of San Francisco, she seemed to have an unusual connection with food that went beyond textbook knowledge. Her fingers could detect the perfect doneness of bread just by touch, and she could identify spices by their aroma from across the room. But none of this mattered to Chef Auguste Moreau, the most feared instructor at the Institute. Chef Moreau was a legend in the culinary world. He had earned 3 Michelin stars in Paris before moving to America to teach. His reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Students whispered stories about his impossible standards and his famous declaration that had crushed the dreams of countless aspiring chefs over the years. On the first day of his advanced French cuisine class, he would always make the same announcement that sent chills down every student's spine. The morning Sarah walked into Chef Moreau's pristine kitchen classroom, she noticed how different it felt from her other cooking classes. Everything gleamed under the bright lights. Copper pots hung in perfect rows, and knives were arranged with military precision. 24 students stood behind individual cooking stations, each equipped with identical sets of ingredients and tools. The air was thick with nervous energy and the faint smell of fresh herbs. Chef Moreau entered exactly at 9 o'clock, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. His gray hair was pulled back severely, and his dark eyes scanned the room like a hawk searching for prey. He wore the traditional white chef's coat, but his carried an authority that made it seem like royal robes. Without any greeting or introduction, he walked to the front of the class and placed a simple white plate on the demonstration table. "Today you will attempt to create the perfect French omelet," he announced, his accent thick and unforgiving. "This is not the rubbery disaster you make for breakfast. This is an art form that requires absolute precision, perfect timing, and complete mastery of heat control. The eggs must be barely set, creamy inside, with a surface as smooth as silk. No brown spots, no tears, no imperfections of any kind." The students exchanged nervous glances. They had all made omelets before, but something in Chef Moreau's tone suggested this would be different. He continued his explanation, describing the exact temperature the pan should reach, the precise angle at which to hold the spatula, and the rhythmic motion required to achieve the perfect texture. His hands moved gracefully as he demonstrated, creating what looked like a golden pillow of perfection in less than 2 minutes. "You have 1 hour," he declared, checking his expensive watch. "But understand this clearly. No person can master this lesson on their first attempt. It takes years of practice to achieve perfection. I expect to see 24 failures today, and that will be normal. Do not disappoint me by believing you are exceptional." Sarah felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest. Throughout her life, she had been told what she couldn't do. Teachers had said she couldn't excel in academics because of her learning disability. Coaches had said she was too small for sports. Even her own family had suggested she choose a more practical career than cooking. But each time someone told her something was impossible, it only strengthened her determination. She cracked her eggs with careful precision, watching as the golden yolks settled perfectly in the clear whites. Around her, she could hear the nervous chatter of her classmates as they began their attempts. Some were already struggling with the basic preparation, while others rushed ahead without proper attention to detail. Chef Moreau walked between the stations like a silent judge, occasionally stopping to watch someone's technique with obvious disapproval. As Sarah heated her pan, she closed her eyes for a moment and listened. She had learned long ago that cooking was as much about intuition as technique. The sizzle of butter told her when the temperature was right. The way the eggs moved in the pan revealed their readiness. She began the delicate process of stirring and folding, her movements fluid and confident despite the pressure. The first student finished after 30 minutes, presenting a lumpy, overcooked disaster to Chef Moreau. He examined it for exactly 3 seconds before scraping it into the trash without a word. The student's face turned red with embarrassment, but the chef had already moved on. One by one, other students presented their attempts, and one by one, they met the same fate. The trash bin began to fill with failed omelets as the clock ticked away. Sarah was still working when most of her classmates had given up. She had started over twice, unsatisfied with her own standards even though her attempts looked better than anyone else's. Chef Moreau noticed her persistence and moved closer to her station, watching her technique with interest. His presence made the other students nervous, but Sarah seemed completely focused on her task. With 10 minutes remaining, she slid her third attempt onto a clean white plate. The omelet was pale yellow, smooth, and perfectly shaped. She had achieved the exact texture Chef Moreau had described, and she knew it was right. But as she looked up to present it, she saw something unexpected in the chef's eyes. It wasn't approval or surprise, but rather a calculating look that made her stomach flutter with uncertainty. Chef Moreau examined her omelet carefully, pressing it gently with his finger to test the texture. He cut into it with surgical precision, noting how the barely set interior flowed like golden cream. For a moment, the entire class held its breath, waiting for his verdict. Then, without any expression, he scraped her perfect omelet into the trash with all the others. The classroom fell silent. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with confusion and disappointment. She had done everything correctly, followed every instruction, and achieved what looked like perfection. Yet her work had been dismissed, just like everyone else's. Chef Moreau returned to the front of the class, his face revealing nothing about what had just happened. As I predicted, 24 failures, he announced coldly. This concludes today's lesson. Tomorrow, we will begin with basic knife skills, something more appropriate for your current level. As students began cleaning their stations and gathering their belongings, Sarah remained frozen at her workspace. She couldn't understand what had gone wrong. Her omelet had looked identical to the one Chef Moreau had demonstrated. The texture was perfect, the appearance flawless. Yet something had been missing, some element she couldn't identify. Chef Moreau was organizing his demonstration materials when Sarah approached his table. She wanted answers, needed to understand where she had failed. But as she opened her mouth to speak, he looked up at her with those penetrating dark eyes and said something that would change everything. Miss Martinez, I suggest you reconsider your career choice. True mastery requires more than just following instructions. It requires something you clearly lack. His words cut through her like a sharp blade, precise and devastating. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at her textbooks and wondering if Chef Moreau was right. Maybe she was fooling herself about her abilities. Maybe all the encouragement from her other instructors had been mere politeness. The omelet had seemed perfect to her, but obviously she was missing something crucial, something that separated real chefs from hopeful students. But as she replayed the day's events in her mind, she noticed something strange about Chef Moreau's behavior. The way he had watched her work suggested interest, not indifference. The careful examination of her omelet indicated it was worthy of attention. And his harsh words afterward seemed almost too cruel, as if he was trying to provoke a specific reaction rather than simply dismiss her efforts. Sarah made a decision that night that would prove to be the turning point of her culinary career. Instead of accepting defeat or changing her major, she would discover what Chef Moreau really wanted from his students. She would uncover the secret behind his impossible standards and find a way to meet them. Little did she know that her journey would lead to a challenge unlike anything she could imagine, one that would test not just her cooking skills, but her ability to trust in abilities she didn't even know she possessed. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Culinary Institute an hour before classes began. She had barely slept, her mind churning with questions about Chef Moreau's teaching methods and her own abilities. The hallways were empty except for a few early-rising staff members preparing for the day. She made her way to the kitchen where yesterday's disaster had unfolded, hoping to find some answers in the quiet space. To her surprise, she found Chef Moreau already there, methodically sharpening a set of knives with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for operation. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound being the rhythmic scraping of steel against whetstone. "You're early, Miss Martinez," he observed, not pausing in his work. Most students who receive my honest assessment don't return the next day. Sarah gathered her courage and stepped closer to his workstation. I need to understand what I did wrong yesterday. My omelet looked perfect to me, but obviously I'm missing something important. I want to learn. Chef Moreau set down his knife and studied her with those penetrating eyes. Perfect appearance means nothing if the soul is absent. You followed my instructions precisely, used proper technique, achieved the correct texture. But you cooked with your head, not with your heart. Food without passion is merely fuel. His words confused her more than they clarified. Sarah had poured her heart into that omelet, focused all her attention on creating something beautiful. I don't understand. How can you tell if someone cooked with passion just by looking at their food? A slight smile played at the corners of Chef Moreau's mouth, the first hint of warmth she had seen from him. That, Miss Martinez, is what separates true chefs from mere cooks. The ability to taste emotion, to feel the story behind each dish. It cannot be taught from textbooks or learned through repetition alone. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into Chef Moreau's classes with renewed determination. She watched his every move, analyzed his techniques, and practiced obsessively in her own time. But, despite her efforts, she continued to fall short of his impossible standards. Every dish she prepared was technically correct, yet somehow lacking the mysterious quality he demanded. Her classmates began to avoid the advanced French cuisine class, transferring to easier courses taught by more forgiving instructors. The class that had started with 24 students dwindled to 12, then 8, then, finally, just 5 dedicated souls willing to endure Chef Moreau's brutal honesty. Sarah remained, stubborn in her refusal to surrender. During this time, she began to notice patterns in Chef Moreau's behavior that others missed. He would taste dishes with his eyes closed, as if searching for something beyond flavor. When he found a technique lacking, he would demonstrate the correct method not just once, but multiple times, varying subtle elements each time. Most interesting of all, she observed that he seemed to cook differently when he thought no one was watching. Late one evening, while staying after class to practice her knife skills, Sarah witnessed something extraordinary. Chef Moreau was preparing what appeared to be a simple vegetable soup for the next day's demonstration. But, as she watched from her hidden position behind a storage rack, she saw him cook in a way she had never seen before. His movements were almost dance-like, completely different from his usual rigid demonstrations. He tasted constantly, adjusting seasonings not by measurement but by intuition. Most remarkably, he seemed to be listening to the food as it cooked, responding to sounds and aromas that were invisible to normal observation. When he finally tasted the finished soup, his entire expression changed, becoming almost peaceful. Sarah remained hidden until he left, then emerged to find the kitchen filled with the most incredible aroma she had ever experienced. The scent of that simple soup contained layers of complexity that seemed impossible for such basic ingredients. She stood there breathing it in, trying to understand how the same vegetables and broth she used daily could create something so transcendent. The next morning, Chef Moreau served portions of his soup to the remaining students as an example of proper seasoning balance. When Sarah tasted it, she was overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't explain. The soup told a story of autumn gardens and family gatherings, of comfort and love passed down through generations. Tears actually came to her eyes, though she tried to hide them. Now, Chef Moreau announced to the class, "You will prepare the same soup. The recipe is simple: vegetables, broth, herbs. You have 1 hour." Sarah approached this challenge differently than any before. Instead of focusing solely on technique, she tried to remember what she had observed the night before. She closed her eyes while chopping vegetables, listening to the sound of her knife and feeling for the right rhythm. She seasoned by taste and instinct rather than measurement, the way she had seen Chef Moreau do. As her soup simmered, something magical happened. The kitchen began to fill with an aroma that reminded her of her grandmother's cooking, of Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Other students stopped their work to look toward her station, drawn by the incredible scent. Even Chef Moreau paused in his supervision to investigate. When time was called, Sarah was nervous but hopeful. She had cooked with a freedom she had never experienced before, trusting instincts she didn't fully understand. Her soup looked identical to those prepared by her classmates, but she knew something was different about it. Chef Moreau tasted each student's soup in turn, his expressions ranging from neutral to mildly disappointed. When he reached Sarah's station, he paused longer than usual before lifting the spoon to his lips. As he tasted, his eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of surprise she had ever seen from him. He set down the spoon and looked at her directly. "Better," he said simply, but the word carried more weight than any praise she had ever received. "You're beginning to understand." But understanding and mastery are different things entirely. That afternoon, Chef Moreau approached Sarah after class with an unexpected proposal. "Miss Martinez, I'm going to offer you an opportunity that I've extended to only 3 students in my 20 years of teaching. If you're truly serious about learning what I have to teach, meet me in the kitchen this Saturday at dawn. Come prepared to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." Sarah agreed immediately, though she had no idea what she was committing to. Chef Moreau's expression became more serious than usual as he continued. "I must warn you that this will not be like regular classes. You will be asked to cook in ways that will challenge everything you think you know about food preparation. Many students have tried and failed to complete what I'm about to teach you. Are you certain you're ready for this?" The intensity in his voice made Sarah hesitate for just a moment, but her determination won out. "I'm ready," she declared, though deep down she wondered if anyone could truly be ready for whatever Chef Moreau had planned. That Friday night, Sarah could barely contain her excitement and anxiety. She had no idea what to expect from her private lesson with the legendary chef. Would he teach her secret techniques passed down from master to student? Would he reveal the mysteries behind his impossible standards? All she knew was that this opportunity could change everything. She spent the evening preparing mentally, reviewing everything she had learned about cooking and about Chef Moreau himself. She thought about the way he moved in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching, the peaceful expression on his face when he tasted something he had created with genuine passion. She wondered if she would ever be able to achieve that level of connection with her craft. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah had no idea that the lesson awaiting her would be unlike anything she could imagine. She didn't know that Chef Moreau was about to challenge her in a way that would force her to abandon everything she thought she knew about cooking and trust in abilities she had never fully recognized within herself. The stage was set for a confrontation with her own limitations and fears, a test that would push her beyond the boundaries of normal culinary instruction into territory that few chefs ever had the courage to explore. What Chef Moreau planned for Saturday morning would either launch her toward true mastery or convince her once, and for all that some challenges were simply too great to overcome. Saturday arrived with a gray dawn that painted the Culinary Institute in muted tones. Sarah reached the building at exactly 6 o'clock, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. The parking lot was empty except for Chef Moreau's vintage motorcycle, a sleek machine that somehow suited his mysterious personality perfectly. She found the kitchen door unlocked, as he had promised it would be. Inside, the familiar space had been transformed. All the usual clutter of a teaching kitchen had been cleared away, leaving only one perfectly prepared workstation in the center of the room. Ingredients were arranged with museum-like precision. Fresh herbs still glistening with morning dew, vegetables that looked like they had been harvested minutes earlier, and proteins that appeared to have been selected by an expert with decades of experience. Chef Moreau stood beside the workstation, but his appearance was different from his usual classroom persona. Gone was the rigid posture and severe expression. Instead, he seemed almost relaxed, like a master craftsman preparing to share sacred knowledge with a worthy apprentice. He wore a simple black apron over casual clothes, and his hair was slightly disheveled, giving him a more human appearance than Sarah had ever seen. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I hope you slept well, because what we're about to attempt will require every ounce of your concentration and Intuition. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence while her stomach churned with anxiety. I'm ready for whatever you want to teach me. Chef Moreau smiled, but it wasn't entirely reassuring. We'll see. Today's lesson is about cooking with more than just your hands and your knowledge. True mastery requires you to cook with every sense, to become so connected with your ingredients that you can feel their needs without relying on sight alone. He gestured toward the workstation where a silk scarf lay beside the carefully arranged ingredients. Sarah's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was suggesting, but she couldn't quite believe it. You want me to cook blindfolded? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to cook with the same instincts that guided our ancestors before they had thermometers and timers and all the modern tools that make us lazy, Chef Moreau replied. For thousands of years, humans created magnificent food using nothing but their senses and their connection to the ingredients. Today, we're going to rediscover that lost art. Sarah stared at the scarf as if it were a dangerous weapon. The idea of cooking without sight seemed not just difficult, but impossible. How could she tell if meat was properly cooked? How would she know if vegetables were the right color? How could she plate anything without being able to see what she was doing? I understand your fear, Chef Moreau continued, reading her expression perfectly. Every student I presented with this challenge has had the same reaction. Most refuse to even attempt it. Those who try usually give up within minutes, overwhelmed by the impossibility of the task. His words stung, reminding Sarah of his earlier declaration that no person could master this lesson. But instead of discouraging her, they awakened the same stubborn determination that had kept her in his class when others had fled. She picked up the silk scarf and examined its soft texture, imagining how the world would change when this barrier blocked her vision. What exactly do you want me to cook? She asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. A complete 3-course meal, Chef Moreau replied without hesitation. Appetizer, main course, and dessert. You have 3 hours to plan, prepare, and plate everything. I will not help you beyond offering basic safety guidance if you're in danger of injuring yourself. The challenge seemed insurmountable. Sarah had never attempted anything so complex even with full vision, and now she was being asked to do it blind. But as she looked at the beautiful ingredients before her, she felt something she hadn't experienced before, a strange sense of excitement mixed with her fear. Will you tell me what ingredients are available? She asked. Chef Moreau shook his head. You must discover everything through touch, smell, and taste. The blindfold goes on now, and it doesn't come off until you present your final course. Sarah took a deep breath and tied the silk scarf over her eyes. The world disappeared into complete darkness, and immediately every other sense seemed to intensify. She could hear the hum of refrigeration units that she had never noticed before, smell the faint aroma of cleaning products mixed with the natural sense of fresh ingredients, and feel the slight vibration of the building's heating system through the floor. Her first few movements were clumsy and uncertain. She reached toward the workstation and nearly knocked over what felt like a bottle of oil. Chef Moreau said nothing, offering no guidance or reassurance. Sarah realized she was completely on her own, forced to navigate this challenge using abilities she had never fully developed. She began by exploring the ingredients systematically, using her hands to identify each item. There were tomatoes that felt perfectly ripe, their skin yielding slightly to pressure. Fresh herbs released their distinctive aromas when she brushed them with her fingers. She found what felt like a piece of fish, its flesh firm and cold, smelling of the ocean. Root vegetables revealed their identity through shape and texture, while spices announced themselves through fragrance alone. As Sarah became more comfortable with her surroundings, something remarkable began to happen. Without the distraction of sight, she found herself paying attention to details she had never noticed before. The tomatoes didn't just feel ripe. She could sense exactly how ripe, understanding instinctively how they would behave when cooked. The fish told her its freshness through subtle cues that went beyond simple smell. She decided to start with the appetizer, choosing to prepare what she envisioned as a tomato and herb salad with a light vinaigrette. But As she began working, she realized that her usual approach to cooking wouldn't work. She couldn't rely on visual cues to tell her when ingredients were properly prepared or combined. Instead, she had to trust her other senses completely. The sound of her knife cutting through tomatoes became a guide to their readiness. The rhythm of her chopping created a meditative cadence that helped her focus. When she whisked the vinaigrette, she listened for the change in tone that indicated proper emulsification. Most importantly, she tasted constantly, adjusting flavors based on her palate rather than predetermined measurements. Time seemed to move differently in the darkness. Without the visual reference points she normally used to judge her progress, Sarah found herself existing in a state of pure concentration. Hours passed like minutes as she moved through each course, relying increasingly on instincts she had never known she possessed. For the main course, she chose to prepare the fish she had identified earlier, pairing it with roasted vegetables and a sauce made from ingredients she had discovered through careful exploration. Every step required complete faith in her abilities. She had to judge the doneness of the fish by touch and sound, determining when the vegetables were properly roasted by their aroma, and creating a sauce that balanced flavors she could taste but not see. The dessert presented the greatest challenge of all. She had found what felt like fresh fruit and discovered containers of what she believed to be cream and sugar. But creating something elegant and refined without being able to see the final presentation seemed almost impossible. She decided to prepare a simple fruit tart, relying on texture and taste to guide her through the complex process of making pastry and preparing the filling. As she worked, Sarah became aware that Chef Moreau was moving around the kitchen, observing her progress. Occasionally, she heard the scratch of a pen on paper, as if he were taking notes. But he remained silent, offering no encouragement or criticism. She was completely alone with her ingredients and her growing understanding of what it meant to cook by pure instinct. The most surprising discovery was how much more connected she felt to the food itself. Without the ability to see, she had to engage with each ingredient on a deeper level, understanding its properties and potential in ways she had never explored before. The cooking process became almost intimate, a conversation between herself and the raw materials she was transforming. When she finally completed all 3 courses and carefully plated them using only her sense of touch and spatial awareness, Sarah felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had accomplished something she would have thought impossible just a few hours earlier. But she had no idea whether her dishes would be edible, much less impressive, when she finally removed the blindfold. "I think I'm finished," she announced, her voice hoarse from hours of intense concentration. "Are you satisfied with what you've created?" Chef Moreau asked, his tone giving no hint of his opinion. Sarah considered the question carefully. She had cooked with more focus and intuition than ever before in her life. Every decision had been based on sensory information rather than visual appearance or rigid technique. Whether the results would meet external standards, she couldn't say. But she knew she had pushed herself beyond her previous limitations and discovered capabilities she hadn't known existed. "I've never cooked like this before," she admitted. "I have no idea if it's good, but it feels right somehow." Chef Moreau's footsteps approached her workstation. She could sense him examining her creations, though she still couldn't see anything. The silence stretched out painfully as he evaluated hours of her blindfolded work. "Remove the blindfold," he said finally. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied the silk scarf and opened her eyes to a world that seemed almost impossibly bright after hours of darkness. As her vision adjusted, she looked down at her 3 plates and gasped in amazement at what she had accomplished. Sarah blinked several times as her eyes adjusted to the light, and when her vision finally cleared, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The 3 plates before her were not just edible, they were beautiful. The tomato salad was arranged with an artistic precision that she had never achieved before, colors vibrant and complementary. The fish was perfectly golden, surrounded by vegetables that looked as if they had been photographed for a magazine cover. The fruit tart was elegant and refined, its pastry golden, and its fruit arranged in a pattern that seemed almost too perfect to be accidental. "How is this possible?" she whispered, touching one of the plates gently, as if it might disappear. I couldn't see anything I was doing. Chef Moreau moved closer to examine her work, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. He studied each plate with the intensity of an art critic evaluating a masterpiece, noting details that Sarah herself was only now discovering. The precision of her knife work, the balance of colors and textures, the subtle sophistication of her flavor combinations. Everything indicated a level of skill that should have been impossible for someone cooking blind. "Tell me what you experienced while you were cooking," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her workstation. His formal teaching persona had completely disappeared, replaced by something that resembled genuine curiosity. Sarah struggled to find words for what had happened during those hours of darkness. It was like learning a new language, but one I somehow already knew. I could feel what the ingredients needed, hear when things were ready, taste the changes happening in real time. Everything was more intense, more immediate. She paused, trying to capture the essence of the transformation she had experienced. I stopped thinking about cooking techniques and started listening to the food itself. Does that make sense? Chef Moreau nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. It makes perfect sense. You've just experienced what I've been trying to teach for 20 years. Most chefs never discover this level of intuitive connection, even after decades of experience. You found it in a single morning. He stood up and began to taste her dishes, starting with the appetizer. Sarah watched his face carefully, searching for any indication of his judgment. His expression remained neutral as he worked through each course, but she noticed that he took his time with each bite, savoring flavors and textures with the careful attention of someone who understood the effort that had gone into their creation. "Extraordinary," he said finally, setting down his fork after finishing the dessert. "This is not just good cooking, Sarah. This is cooking that tells a story, that carries emotion, that connects with something deeper than mere technique. You've created exactly what I was hoping you might discover." Sarah felt a rush of pride, mixed with confusion. "But how did I do it? I couldn't see what I was doing. I was just guessing most of the time." "That's exactly the point," Chef Moreau replied, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher, sharing a fundamental truth. "When you removed sight from the equation, you were forced to rely on instincts that most cooks never develop. You connected with your ingredients on a level that goes beyond the physical, beyond the mechanical process of following recipes and techniques." He began to pace around the kitchen as he spoke, his hands moving expressively. Modern culinary education focuses too heavily on visual presentation and technical precision. We teach students to cook with their eyes and their memories, but we neglect the deeper senses that actually create great food. Taste, smell, touch, even sound. These are the tools that master chefs use instinctively. Sarah looked at her plates again, still struggling to believe what she had accomplished. "But why did you make it so difficult? Why did you tell us that no one could master this lesson?" Chef Moreau's expression became almost sad for a moment. "Because 99% of students can't. They're too dependent on their visual cues, too trapped by conventional thinking. They try to cook the way they think cooking should look, rather than the way cooking should feel." He gestured toward her completed dishes. "You succeeded because you have something rare, the ability to trust your instincts even when logic tells you it's impossible. That's what separates true chefs from mere technicians." Over the next hour, Chef Moreau shared stories from his own training in France, describing masters who could identify the exact temperature of chocolate by touch, who could determine the doneness of bread by the sound of its crust, who could create perfect sauces without ever measuring a single ingredient. These legendary figures seemed almost mythical, but now Sarah understood that their abilities were not magic, but rather the result of developing senses that most people ignored. "Your cooking has always had technical competence," he explained as they cleaned the kitchen together. "But it lacked soul, passion, the indefinable quality that makes food memorable. Today, you discovered that quality. The question now is whether you can maintain it when you return to cooking with your eyes open. This challenge worried Sarah more than the blindfolded cooking had. She understood now why her earlier attempts had fallen short despite their technical accuracy. She had been cooking with her head rather than her heart, focusing on appearance rather than essence. But how could she maintain the intuitive connection she had discovered once she returned to normal cooking conditions? Chef Moreau seemed to read her thoughts. The blindfold was not the goal, merely the tool. What you learned today about listening to your ingredients, trusting your instincts, cooking with passion rather than just precision. These lessons apply whether your eyes are open or closed. As they finished cleaning, he made her an offer that took her breath away. I'm recommending you for an internship at Le Bernardin in New York. The head chef there is an old friend of mine, and he's always interested in students who show genuine promise. If you're interested, you could start next month. Sarah couldn't speak for a moment. Le Bernardin was one of the most prestigious restaurants in America, a place where culinary careers were made. The opportunity was beyond anything she had dared to dream about when she started culinary school. But I'm still just a student, she managed to say. I don't have enough experience for something like that. Experience can be gained, Chef Moreau replied. Instinct cannot be taught. You have something that cannot be acquired through years of training. Don't waste it by underestimating yourself. That afternoon, Sarah walked through the city in a daze, her mind reeling from the morning's revelations. Everything she thought she knew about cooking had been turned upside down. She had discovered abilities within herself that she had never suspected, had accomplished something that should have been impossible, and had been offered an opportunity that could change her life forever. But, perhaps most importantly, she had learned something profound about the nature of mastery itself. It wasn't just about technical skill or memorizing recipes. True mastery required a willingness to trust instincts, to connect with the essence of the craft on a level that went beyond rational understanding. As evening approached, Sarah found herself in the kitchen of her small apartment, preparing a simple dinner. She thought about Chef Moreau's challenge to maintain her newfound awareness while cooking with her eyes open. Would she be able to retain the intuitive connection she had discovered? Or would she slip back in her old patterns of cooking by sight and technique alone? She decided to test herself, preparing a basic pasta dish while consciously trying to apply what she had learned. She closed her eyes while seasoning the sauce, listening for the change in bubbling that would tell her it was ready. She tasted constantly, adjusting flavors based on instinct rather than measurement. Most importantly, she tried to maintain the meditative focus that had guided her through the blindfolded cooking experience. The results were remarkable. Even this simple meal had a depth of flavor and satisfaction that her previous cooking had lacked. She could taste the difference that passion and intuition made, understand why Chef Moreau had been so dismissive of her earlier technically correct but soulless efforts. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From her initial failure with the perfect omelet to the triumph of cooking blindfolded, she had learned that mastery was not about following rules, but about transcending them. She had discovered that the most important ingredient in any dish was not listed in any recipe book. She thought about Chef Moreau's words and his unexpected offer. The internship at Le Bernardin represented not just a career opportunity, but a chance to continue developing the abilities she had discovered within herself. It was a path toward becoming the kind of chef who could create not just food, but experiences that touched people's hearts and souls. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah knew that her culinary journey was just beginning. The blindfolded cooking experience had been a revelation, but it was also a responsibility. She had been given a gift, the ability to cook with intuition and passion, and now she had to decide how to use it. The challenge ahead was not just to master techniques or memorize recipes, but to continue growing as an artist who could transform simple ingredients into something transcendent. Tomorrow, she would give Chef Moreau her answer about the internship. But tonight, she allowed herself to savor the memory of what she had accomplished and the excitement of what lay ahead. She had proven that mastery was possible, that the instructor's challenge could be met, and that sometimes the only way to see clearly was to close your eyes and trust your heart. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the gleaming kitchen of Le Bernardin, her chef's whites crisp and spotless, her hands steady as she prepared for the evening service. The prestigious restaurant hummed with the controlled energy that marked the world's finest kitchens, where every movement was purposeful and every dish was a work of art. She had come a long way from the nervous student who had first encountered Chef Moreau's impossible challenge. The transition to professional cooking had not been easy. The pace at Le Bernardin was relentless, the standards unforgiving, and the pressure constant. But Sarah had discovered that the lessons learned during her blindfolded cooking experience served her well in this demanding environment. When the kitchen became chaotic during busy services, she could close her eyes for a moment and reconnect with the intuitive awareness that had become her greatest strength. Chef Henri Dubois, the head chef who had accepted her based on Chef Moreau's recommendation, had initially been skeptical of a young cook who claimed to have learned advanced techniques while blindfolded. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice something special about her work. Her dishes consistently had a quality that went beyond technical perfection. They carried emotion, told stories, created connections with the guests who tasted them. During slower moments in the kitchen, Sarah often thought about the conversation that had changed her life. After her successful blindfolded cooking experience, she had indeed accepted Chef Moreau's offer to intern at Le Bernardin. But more importantly, she had continued to develop the intuitive cooking abilities she had discovered that Saturday morning. She had learned to cook with all her senses engaged, to trust her instincts even when they contradicted conventional wisdom, and to infuse her food with the kind of passion that transformed mere ingredients into memorable experiences. The blindfold had been removed, but the awareness it had taught her remained. Today marked a special milestone in her journey. Chef Dubois had asked her to prepare a tasting menu for a group of visiting culinary instructors from France, including Chef Moreau himself, who was in New York for a culinary conference. It would be her first opportunity to demonstrate publicly what she had learned, to show whether the abilities discovered in that blindfolded lesson had truly become part of who she was as a chef. As the afternoon preparation began, Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nervous excitement that preceded any significant challenge. She had planned a 5-course menu that would showcase not just her technical skills, but also her ability to create food that spoke to the emotions. Each dish was designed to tell part of the story of her culinary journey, from uncertainty to discovery to mastery. The first course was a reimagined version of the French omelet that had started everything, but this time prepared with ingredients that would have been impossible to use in culinary school. Quail eggs, truffle oil, microgreens, and a delicate cheese sauce that required the kind of intuitive timing she had learned to trust. As she prepared the dish, she closed her eyes briefly, remembering the feeling of cooking without sight, and let that memory guide her technique. For the second course, she had chosen to recreate the tomato salad she had prepared during her blindfolded test, but elevated with ingredients worthy of Le Bernardin's reputation. Heirloom tomatoes in 6 different varieties, each prepared differently to highlight their unique characteristics, dressed with oils and vinegars that had been carefully selected to complement their individual flavors. The main course was a version of the fish dish she had cooked blind, but now featuring turbot prepared with techniques she had learned during her months at the restaurant. The key was not the sophistication of the preparation, but the way each element had been chosen and combined based on intuitive understanding rather than rigid formula. The dessert course would test her ability to apply her sensory awareness to pastry work, traditionally the most precise and unforgiving area of cooking. She had designed a chocolate tart that required her to judge doneness by touch and aroma, to balance sweetness and bitterness by taste alone, and to create visual beauty through techniques that originated in feeling rather than sight. As the evening service began, Sarah found herself entering the meditative state that had become natural to her during intense cooking periods. The sounds of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, the rhythm of knives, the calls of service, became a symphony that guided her movements. She cooked not just with her hands, but with her entire being, every sense engaged in creating the perfect expression of her ingredients. Chef Du Bois watched her preparation with interest, noting the unusual way she worked. While other cooks relied heavily on timers and visual cues, Sarah seemed to operate by instinct, tasting constantly, adjusting seasoning by feel, determining doneness through sounds and aromas that others missed. Her cooking had a fluidity that marked the work of someone who had transcended basic technique to achieve true artistry. When the time came to serve the visiting instructors, Sarah personally carried each course to the private dining room where they waited. She could see Chef Moreau among the group, his expression as unreadable as ever, giving no indication whether he expected success or failure from his former student. The first course was received with polite appreciation, the kind of response that quality cooking typically generated from professional evaluators. But as the meal progressed, something changed in the room's atmosphere. Conversations became more animated. Faces showed genuine surprise and delight, and the careful professional detachment that marked experienced food critics began to give way to authentic enthusiasm. By the time the dessert was served, Sarah knew she had succeeded in ways that went beyond mere technical competence. She had created food that not only satisfied hunger, but also awakened emotions, triggered memories, and created connections between the diners and their own experiences with exceptional cuisine. After the meal, as the instructors departed with effusive praise for the kitchen, Chef Moreau remained behind to speak with Sarah privately. For a moment, they stood together in the now quiet dining room, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "You've exceeded even my expectations," he said finally. "What you accomplished tonight was not just excellent cooking. It was cooking that carried meaning, that transformed ingredients into experience. You've truly mastered the lesson." Sarah felt tears threatening to form, remembering the journey from that first failed omelet to this moment of recognition. "I couldn't have done it without that blindfolded experience. It changed everything about how I understand cooking." Chef Moreau nodded thoughtfully. The blindfold was never about cooking without sight. It was about learning to cook with insight. You've proven that mastery is possible for those willing to trust themselves completely. He paused, then continued with something approaching pride in his voice. "I have a proposition for you. I'm opening a new restaurant in San Francisco next year, and I need a sous chef who understands what real cooking means. Someone who can cook with soul as well as skill. Would you be interested?" The offer represented another dramatic step forward in Sarah's career, but more importantly, it was recognition that she had truly learned what Chef Moreau had been trying to teach. She had become the kind of chef who could create not just food, but experiences that touch people's lives. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'd be honored." As they shook hands, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. From a struggling student who couldn't understand why her technically perfect omelet was rejected, to a chef who could create memorable experiences through pure intuition and passion, the transformation had been complete. The blindfolded cooking experience had been a catalyst, but the real lesson had been about trust. Trust in her abilities, trust in her instincts, and trust in the connection between chef and ingredients that could only be achieved when technique transcended into artistry. Looking back, Sarah understood that Chef Moreau's original declaration had been both true and false. He had said that no person could master the lesson, and in one sense he was right. The lesson could not be mastered through conventional learning or simple practice, but it could be mastered through a willingness to abandon conventional approaches and trust in abilities that most people never developed. She had proven that mastery was not about following rules, but about transcending them, not about controlling every variable, but about learning to dance with uncertainty. The instructor had insisted that no person could master this lesson, but Sarah had discovered that the right person, with the courage to cook blindfolded and trust completely in their instincts, could indeed achieve what seemed impossible. As she returned to the kitchen to help with the evening's cleanup, Sarah smiled at the memory of that silk scarf covering her eyes and the terror she had felt at the prospect of cooking without sight. That fear had been transformed into confidence, that uncertainty into mastery. She had learned to see with more than her eyes, to cook with more than her hands, and to create food that nourished more than just the body. The lesson had been mastered, but, more importantly, it had become part of who she was. Sarah had discovered that true culinary mastery was not about perfect technique or flawless presentation. It was about the courage to trust yourself completely and the wisdom to cook with your heart as well as your hands. In overcoming Chef Moreau's impossible challenge, she had found not just professional success, but a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a true artist in the kitchen.